first of all, the idea of diversification, it makes sense if you have an array of options, all of them risky and most of them poorly understood. And so if I give you 500 companies and it takes you 100 hours to understand each company, and you don't have 100 hours times 500 to understand the companies, then simply buying the entire portfolio of all 500 of them is not an irrational idea. But diversification doesn't make sense if your life depends upon making the one right choice. So if you're on a sinking ship and there are 10 lifeboats and one of them is functional and in the water and floating, and the other 9 have a hole in them, and you can see that they have a hole in them and they're not going to get deployed, then simply putting the 10 kids, each one of them in a different boat, isn't a wise thing. It's better to put all your family into the boat that's floating. And often it's the same with a car or any kind of technology you understand. And many times you can't even afford, right? Like the city can have one bridge. The city can't afford 10 bridges. It can't afford to diversify and have 10 bridges over the same river. It doesn't make things better. It will make the city bankrupt. And so sometimes you just have to come to the right choice. And the last point is, if you're in an economy with hyperinflation and the currency is going to zero and everybody's going to starve to death, then choosing to leave half your family in the country and take the other half out of the country because you want to be diversified is just foolish, right? If your house is on fire, you should take the entire family out of the house. You shouldn't leave half the kids in the house and half the kids in the backyard outside the house in order to be safe, right? You're not safer if there's a problem. Yeah, so the trope of diversification is appropriate when you don't know the right answer and you're placing a bunch of bets across a bunch of different alternatives. But when you actually have math and physics and common sense to guide you, then nobody diversifies. You choose the best outcome and you do that. So why MicroStrategy discovered Bitcoin? Well, we had $500 million of cash. It was generating 0% interest. The cost of capital was 15 to 20%, and we were basically looking at a situation where the company was going to lose as much money holding the cash as it made through its operations each year. And therefore, we were failing as a business. The company was going to die. And so we had to find something to do with the money. How do you invest the money in something that will return more than the cost of capital? The cost of capital in the traditional dollar economy is the S&P return. It's maybe 12 to 14% a year. If you're returning 0%, you're losing 12 to 14% of your capital a year. And if you're returning 24%, you're adding 24% nominally or 12% in real terms every single year. So Bitcoin turns out to be the only commodity in the world that is actually a scarcity. It's the only commodity that's a good investment over the long period. Every other commodity will underperform the S&P index because they're not scarce. Bitcoin will overperform the S&P index because it is scarce. And so it's unique as the only commodity that actually is good investment, and it's also the only digital commodity, an asset without an issuer. And that gives it regulatory superiority for a publicly traded company, because public companies in the U.S. can't hold more than 40% of their balance sheet in a security. They have to own property or a commodity. So MicroStrategy was, facing a quick death or a slow death or innovate, try a new idea. And so we tried the new idea, and that's what got us on the path to becoming a Bitcoin company.
Was it difficult to convince people, though, because 2020 people were still arguing if Bitcoin was a scam?
Yeah, it was a very methodic process. First, I had to convince myself. In 2013, I thought it was going to fail. What we say is that everybody's against Bitcoin before they're for it, and Bitcoin's on a need-to-know basis. So if you don't need it, if your life didn't depend on it, you would dismiss it as a nuisance or an oddity of some sort. It's like electricity or a new thing like a motor. If you didn't expect to find clean, silent power, then you wouldn't know you need to redesign your factory in 1700 for electricity. You wouldn't look for it. If you had a factory in 1900 and you're going out of business because your competitor is producing faster and cheaper than you, and your choice was to go out of business, go bankrupt, and lose everything and be on the street, or check out the new electricity thing, you would go and check out the new electricity thing. You had everything to gain, nothing to lose. And that's how paradigm shifts take place, and that's how innovation takes place throughout human history. Bitcoin is digital energy. People are afraid of fire until they realize that fire might be a good thing, or they're afraid of electricity until they realize electricity is a good thing. So we start by convincing ourselves, and then after that, educating the management team, and after that, educating the board of directors, and after that, educating the auditors and the accountants, and after that, educating the shareholders, and after that, progressively upgrading the company and evolving and finding new sets of shareholders. And so it really is an evolutionary process. It's like concentric circles of consensus, and each of them requires hours or tens of hours of contemplation and dialogue.
How long did it take for you to convince yourself? Or like, was it a process of you learning about Bitcoin as well?
I have a little hierarchy. I think everybody's born a skeptic. And so after the first hour, you're a skeptic and you think maybe it's too good to be true, or the government will ban it, or it'll get hacked, or it's a gimmick. And then after 10 hours, you start to believe, oh, it's an asset. Maybe it's a good asset or a bad asset, but then you get upgraded from kind of skeptic to a trader. And you'll trade, like if it's cheap, I'll buy it. And if it's expensive, I'll sell it. But I'm just going to trade it. It's something like soybeans or like oil or like bushels of corn. At the 100-hour point, you think you become an investor. At that point, you think, wow, this is like Facebook for money, like a bank in cyberspace where people can put their money, or I can send money from New York to Tokyo without an intermediary, or I can put money there and leave it there for 30 years. You know, I made a lot of money on Apple, or I made a lot of money on Amazon, or if you made money on Microsoft or Google, and if I said, hey, this is the big tech digital monetary network, it's just another big tech investment. After about $100, you're like, okay, well, that sounds like a good idea. My belief is, the way I made money in big tech investments is I find something everybody needs, nobody can stop, and most people don't understand. If you bought Amazon stock in 2010, it was everybody needs it, nobody can stop it, but everybody disagreed with you. If you bought Amazon stock in 2020, everybody needed it, everybody understood it, and everybody agreed with you. Mm-hmm. You see the difference? You don't want to buy it when everybody understands it and everybody agrees with you. You want to buy Apple in 2011 when everybody's going to need it and nobody can stop it, but most people think the iPhone's only going to be worth $60. So that's the investor idea. You get there about 100 hours. And then in 1,000 hours, we say you become a maximalist. At that point, you say, wait a minute, this is, it's not a company. It's better than a big tech investment because it's not a security. You're not supporting Apple or Google. You're providing property rights to 8 billion people. You're providing freedom, integrity, property rights to 300 million companies, every country, every person on the planet. You know, rich people in New York own buildings, but taxi cab drivers in Nigeria don't own buildings in New York City. If I had $137 in Nigeria, I can't even buy $137 worth of a New York building. So you can see the rich New Yorkers have an advantage over the working class in Africa. But with Bitcoin, if you buy $237 of Bitcoin in Nigeria, you have the same property rights as a billionaire in New York or London that buys $1 billion of Bitcoin. You're pari passu. You're not a limited partner. You don't own a security. You own the actual property. If you went and you bought $10 million worth of real estate in Zambia, Central Africa, there's nothing that I'm going to do in the United States that's going to increase the value of your property in Zambia, Central Africa. But on the other hand, if you bought $10 million of Bitcoin in Zambia, Central Africa, then somebody in Singapore with a Bloomberg terminal who's trading $20 billion a weekend is driving up the value of your property in Zambia, Central Africa. So when you join the Bitcoin network, you're getting the highest common denominator. The smartest, richest person anywhere in the world is working to make you wealthier. And when you buy a building, a warehouse in Alabama, or when you buy a building in rural China, that's the lowest common denominator. There's 0.01% of the people in rural China that might do something that might make your building more valuable, but nobody else cares. And so when you get to 1,000 hours, you think, wait a minute, this is an ethical imperative, right? This is an instrument of economic empowerment for everyone on Earth, every company on Earth, every country on Earth, every institution on Earth, every family on Earth. It is really a singularity because it's the first time in human history where you can convey actual property rights to an individual that cannot be taken from them via force. And I think that's a profound idea.